Wendell Miller, at 40 years old, understood the quiet language of logistics. His life was a map of blinking lights on a screen, each one a truck carrying someone else's goods to someone else's destination. He made $67,000 a year as a freight dispatcher in Cleveland, a salary that felt solid, respectable, and profoundly unspectacular. It was enough to afford the mortgage on their modest split level in Lee Harvard, the monthly payment on his wife Camille's Nissan Rogue, and the endless stream of new sneakers a 9-year-old boy seemed to require. But it was not, apparently, enough to afford a slightly used car for himself. He sat on a worn vinyl chair inside the fluorescent-lit showroom of a Honda dealership on Brook Park Road. The air smelled of stale coffee and tire cleaner. He was trying to buy a 2018 Honda Accord, a practical 4-door sedan with 42,000 miles on it, priced at a reasonable $21,500. His own 2012 Toyota Camry had coughed its last, its transmission finally giving up after 187,000 miles of faithful service. All he wanted was a reliable car to get him to his job and to Micah's soccer games. The loan officer, a young man named David with a too-tight tie, had been gone for 15 minutes. Wendell stared at a poster on the wall advertising a 0% financing deal he knew he wouldn't qualify for. He just needed a standard loan. Something with a monthly payment around $400? He'd run the numbers himself. His credit score was a solid 740, he had less than $5,000 on his own credit cards, and he'd never missed a payment in his life. This should have been easy. When David finally returned, he wasn't holding a folder of papers for Wendell to sign. His face was pale, his expression a mixture of pity and confusion. He sat down heavily, avoiding Wendell's eyes. "Mr. Miller," David began, his voice low, I'm sorry. We can't approve this loan." Wendell felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What? Why? My credit is good." David slid a single sheet of paper across the cheap laminate desk. It was a summary from the credit bureau. "Sir, according to this, your debt-to-income ratio is, well, it's astronomical. It says here you've taken on a significant amount of new debt in the last 6 months." Wendell picked up the paper. His heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. He read the lines, but the words made no sense. A personal loan from First Equity Bank for $45,000. A revolving line of credit with Capital One for $28,000. 3 separate American Express Platinum cards, each one carrying a balance of over $30,000. The numbers swam before his eyes, a dizzying cascade of liability that added up to more than $210,000. It was impossible, a mistake, a catastrophic error. He hadn't opened a new line of credit in a decade. "This is wrong," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This isn't me." He felt the first prickle of a cold sweat on his neck. He was a man who lived his life on a spreadsheet, who knew where every dollar went. This was the financial equivalent of waking up in a foreign country. He had no idea how he had gotten here. Their life was built on the foundation of that $67,000 salary. The split-level home on Invermere Avenue, purchased 10 years ago for $145,000, was their biggest asset. It was a simple, sturdy house with beige siding and a neat lawn that Wendell meticulously maintained with his $1,200 John Deere riding mower. Inside, the walls were covered in framed photos of their son, Micah, and the faint scent of the lemon-scented cleaner Camille insisted on using lingered in the air. Wendell's love was a quiet thing, expressed through acts of service. It was in the lunches he packed for Micah every morning, carefully cutting the crusts off the sandwich and including a handful of $3 organic grapes. It was in the squeaky floorboard he fixed in the hallway, the leaky faucet he repaired under the kitchen sink, the steady, reliable presence that kept their world turning. He wore an $89 Timex watch, and his work uniform consisted of simple polo shirts he bought in 3-packs for $45. Camille, however, had begun to speak a different language, one of aspiration and discontent. She worked in marketing for a downtown firm, a job that paid less than his, but came with a culture of expensive lunches and after-work networking events. She started bringing home items that felt alien in their modest home. A $900 Tory Burch handbag appeared on the kitchen counter one Tuesday. A pair of $750 Christian Louboutin shoes, their famous red soles glowing like a warning, sat by the front door. "It's for work, Wendell," she'd say, her tone defensive. "You have to look the part. It's about projecting success." He never argued. He just nodded, the quiet anxiety about their shared checking account a constant low hum in the back of his mind. He assumed she was putting these things on her own credit card, paying it off with bonuses he never saw. He trusted her. He had no idea how wrong he was. 3 years ago, after a neighbor's car was broken into, Wendell had bought a $450 Lorex CCTV system from Costco. It came with 4 cameras, which he installed himself one Saturday afternoon. One pointed at the driveway, one at the front door, one at the back patio, and one down the length of the street. He'd set it up to record on a continuous loop to a 2-terabyte hard drive in his small basement office. He'd done it for peace of mind, to protect his family. He never imagined that the real threat was already inside the house, and that his simple security system would one day become his most important weapon. The system recorded everything with a silent, impartial eye. It recorded the mailman's daily delivery, the Amazon packages dropped on the porch, the rhythm of their neighbors' lives. And as Wendell would later discover, it recorded the arrival and departure of a gleaming white Mercedes AMG GLE 53. A vehicle with a starting price of $95,000 that began appearing on their street with increasing frequency. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion, a series of small, cruel moments that Wendell, in his trusting nature, had failed to connect. Each one was a brick in the wall that Camille was building between them, a wall he couldn't see until it was already towering over him. The first clear sign, the one that should have shattered his complacency, came from the innocent voice of his own son. He was picking Micah up from his grandparents' house one Sunday afternoon. As they turned onto their street, Micah, strapped into his booster seat in the back of the aging Camry, pointed toward their house. "Daddy, why is Mommy's friend at our house?" Wendell slowed the car. Parked directly in front of their home was the white Mercedes. A tall, impeccably dressed black man was just getting out of the driver's side. He was laughing with Camille, who stood on their front porch, her hand lingering on his arm. The man's suit was sharp, a tailored navy blue, that probably cost more than Wendell's monthly mortgage payment. He radiated an easy, expensive confidence. When Wendell pulled into the driveway, the man gave a curt nod, got back into his car, and drove away. Camille's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, annoyed expression. "Who was that?" Wendell asked, his voice even. "That's Marcus Thorne. He's a colleague from the Henderson account," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "He was just dropping off some files. Honestly, Wendell, don't be so insecure. It's not a good look." He didn't push it. He accepted the explanation because the alternative was too devastating to consider. He told himself he was being paranoid. He had made a critical mistake. The financial pressure became her favorite topic. She would scroll through her phone at the dinner table, sighing dramatically. "Did you see the pictures from the Jacksons' trip to Italy? Their kids are standing in the Colosseum," she said one night, pushing her chicken around her plate. "We can't even afford a weekend trip to Columbus. This $67,000 a year, Wendell, it just isn't cutting it." He felt the familiar sting of shame. He worked hard. He provided. But in her eyes, it was never enough. His job, which he took pride in for its complexity and importance, became a source of her ridicule. "I don't even know what you do," she said once, during a small argument over a $200 water bill. "You just move boxes around on a screen." Marcus manages portfolios worth millions. The name hung in the air between them. He noticed she said it a lot. Then came the gaslighting, the subtle campaign to make him doubt his own memory. Mail started arriving from banks he didn't recognize. Capital One, American Express. Before he could open them, they would disappear from the pile on the kitchen counter. "Did you see a letter from Amex?" he asked one day. "Oh, that? Just junk mail, honey. Pre-approved offers. I threw it all out," she said without looking up from her iPad. When a notice about a new line of credit did make it into his hands, she had a ready explanation. "You signed for that online, remember? We talked about it last month. We needed to consolidate some of the debt from the new roof." He didn't remember talking about it. He didn't remember signing anything. But she was so certain, so convincing, that he began to question himself. Was he really that forgetful? Was the stress of work making him lose his grip? He felt like he was walking through a fog, his own mind turning against him. He was being methodically dismantled piece by piece, and he was too busy trying to hold his family together to realize he was the one being taken apart. Each lie was a scene, a small play she performed with chilling expertise, and he was the unwitting audience, believing every word. Back in the sterile air of the dealership, the world tilted on its axis. The loan officer, David, seeing the profound shock on Wendell's face, leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, this happens sometimes. Identity theft. You should file a police report immediately." But Wendell knew, with a certainty that settled like a block of ice in his chest, that this wasn't the work of a stranger. He looked again at the credit report, his eyes scanning past the terrifying numbers to the fine print. And then he saw it. The detail that explained everything. The mailing address listed for every single fraudulent account. It wasn't their address on Invermere Avenue in Lee Harvard. It was an address on South Park Boulevard in Shaker Heights. The name of the street hit him like a physical blow. Shaker Heights. The wealthiest suburb in the area, a world of sprawling colonial houses, manicured lawns, and old money. A world away from his simple split level. He didn't know anyone who lived in Shaker Heights, except he did. A few weeks ago, during another one of Camille's complaints about their finances, she had let something slip. She was talking about Marcus Thorne, about the big accounts he managed. "His house in Shaker is just incredible, Wendell. Right on South Park Boulevard. You wouldn't even believe it." The blood drained from his face. The room began to feel very small, the air thick and hard to breathe. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. A cold, calculated, and breathtakingly cruel plan. They had used his name, his good credit, his identity, to fund a lifestyle he wasn't a part of, and they had done it by sending the evidence to the one place he would never see it. The lover's house. The $210,000 in debt wasn't just debt. It was a weapon. It was designed to make him look financially reckless, to ruin his credit, to leave him so broken and buried that when Camille finally left, he wouldn't have the resources or the will to fight back. Take it all. He could almost hear them saying, "He can't afford to fight back." David was still talking, saying something about credit freezes and fraud alerts, but Wendell couldn't hear him. All he could hear was the sound of his own life shattering. He folded the piece of paper with neat, precise creases, stood up on shaking legs, and walked out of the dealership, leaving the 2018 Honda Accord behind. He had a much bigger problem than a broken-down car. The drive home in his rattling Toyota Camry was the longest 10 minutes of his life. Every traffic light, every stop sign, felt like an eternity. He had expected to feel rage, a white-hot inferno of betrayal, but he didn't. What washed over him instead was a profound and terrifying calm. The fog of confusion had lifted, and in its place was a landscape of sharp, brutal clarity. The man who had walked into that dealership was gone. In his place was someone else. Someone colder, more focused. Someone who now had a mission. He pulled into his driveway and killed the engine. Through the front window, he could see the soft glow of the television. Micah would be watching cartoons. Camille would be on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The picture of domestic normalcy was a lie, a carefully constructed set for a play whose final act was about to begin. He took a deep breath, composed his face into a mask of weary disappointment, and walked inside. "No luck with the car," he said, dropping his keys into the cheap ceramic bowl by the door. "They wanted too high an interest rate. I'll have to try my credit union on Monday." Camille glanced up from her phone, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Seriously? What's wrong with your credit? Honestly, Wendell." She turned her attention back to the screen. He didn't answer. He walked into the kitchen and started making dinner for his son. Chicken and rice, Micah's favorite. As he measured out the rice and rinsed it in the sink, he watched her. He watched the way her thumb moved expertly across the glass screen, the small, secret smile that played on her lips as she read a message. He felt like a scientist observing a specimen, detached and analytical. The love he had felt for this woman for 15 years had been cauterized, leaving behind nothing but scar tissue. Later that evening, after Micah was in bed, Wendell initiated the next phase of his silent plan. He sat down at the family's $800 Dell desktop computer in the corner of the living room. "Honey," he called out, his voice a perfect imitation of his usual self. "What's the password for our Amazon account again? I want to order Micah that Lego set he wanted, but it's not saving my login." Camille sighed, a theatrical display of impatience. "It's the same password as everything else, Wendell. Camille and Micah 2015 with a capital C and an exclamation point." "It's not working," he lied. "Can you just come type it in?" With an exasperated groan, she got up, walked over to the computer, and typed in the password. What she didn't know was that 2 hours earlier, while she was in the shower, Wendell had spent 10 minutes on Google and installed a simple, invisible keylogger program. As she typed, the program recorded her keystrokes. He now had her universal password, the digital key to her entire secret life. He waited until he heard the soft, steady sound of her breathing from their bedroom. Then, at 11:47 p.m., he went down to his small office in the basement. The office was his sanctuary, a cramped space filled with his manuals for freight logistics and a model train set he'd been working on for years. He sat down, logged into her email account, and began to read. It was all there. Emails between her and Marcus discussing the credit card applications, messages where they laughed about his ignorance, plans for their future in a condo downtown purchased with the money from the sale of the house, his house. He felt a wave of nausea, but he pushed it down, replacing it with cold, hard resolve. He downloaded everything. He saved every email, every attachment, to a new, encrypted hard drive. This was just the beginning. The next morning, a Monday, Wendell called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. He told Camille he had a stomach bug. After she and Micah left, he began his real work. His first call was not to a divorce lawyer, but to his credit union to get a printout of his full financial history. His second was to a highly recommended law firm downtown. He met with Alana James that afternoon. Her office was in a modest, older building, not a gleaming glass tower. She was a sharp, no-nonsense black woman in her 50s, a former prosecutor with eyes that seemed to see right through him. He sat across from her heavy oak desk and told her everything, his voice low and steady. betraying no emotion. He slid the credit report from the dealership and the printout from his credit union across the desk. She listened without interruption, her expression growing more severe with each detail. When he finished, she was silent for a full minute. "This is not a divorce case, Mr. Miller," she said finally, her voice firm. "This is a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud. The divorce is just the exit strategy." She named a retainer fee that made his breath catch in his throat. $15,000. It was nearly every penny he had in his savings account, the money he'd been setting aside for Micah's college education. He didn't hesitate. "How do I pay?" Alana then made the recommendation that would change everything. "You need more than a lawyer. You need a forensic accountant, someone who can trace every single dollar of this fraudulent debt. It's not cheap, but it will be the foundation of our entire case. I know a man. His name is Ben Carter. He's the best." Hiring Ben Carter cost another $8,500. Wendell had to take a loan against his 401k, a move that felt like gutting his own future. But he knew it was necessary. This was no longer about saving his marriage. It was about saving himself. For the next 6 weeks, Wendell lived a surreal double life. By day, he was the same dependable husband and father. He went to work. He helped Micah with his homework. He sat through tense, silent dinners with Camille. But by night, he descended into the basement and transformed into a meticulous, relentless investigator. He spent hours upon hours reviewing the footage from his $450 CCTV system. With chilling precision, he logged every single time Marcus Thorne's white Mercedes had appeared on their street over the past 3 years. He noted the dates, the times of arrival, the times of departure. He created a spreadsheet. There were 172 instances in total. Many of them were during the day, while he was at work. He used the password he'd captured to access their phone records. He downloaded 3 years of text messages between Camille and Marcus. He read them all, his stomach churning as he saw their affair unfold, their casual cruelty, their detailed plans to strip him of everything he had ever worked for. "He'll never figure it out," one of Camille's texts read. "He's too simple." "Just stick to the plan," Marcus had replied. "Take it all. He can't afford to fight back." Wendell saved every message. He printed every email. He cross-referenced the text messages with the CCTV logs and the dates on the fraudulent credit applications. A horrifyingly clear picture emerged, a detailed mosaic of greed and betrayal. He compiled everything into a series of thick, 3-ring binders, each one labeled with a cold, clear title: Financial Forensics, Communications Archive, Surveillance Log. He called it the Thorne File. He was no longer just a freight dispatcher. He was an archivist of his own destruction. The day Camille finally served him with divorce papers felt almost like a relief. The pretense was over. He accepted the papers from the process server at his front door, his face a neutral mask. Camille was at work. Micah was at school. He was alone in the house that was no longer a home. He read the petition. It was filled with audacious lies. She was demanding the house, claiming it was her inheritance that provided the down payment, a blatant falsehood. She was demanding full custody of Micah, and she was demanding alimony, citing his financial irresponsibility and the massive joint debt that had ruined their future. The petition had been prepared by Julian Croft, a notoriously aggressive attorney whose face was on billboards all over Cleveland. His fee, Wendell knew, was a staggering $1,200 per hour. They were using Wendell's own stolen money to pay the lawyer who was going to destroy him. Wendell immediately drove to Alana James's office with the papers. She read through the petition, her lips a thin, hard line. "Arrogant," she muttered. "They think you're a fool with no resources. They're about to find out how wrong they are." Alana did not file a formal response through the courts. Instead, she initiated the strike. She placed the encrypted hard drive containing every piece of evidence Wendell had gathered, the complete Thorn file, into a waterproof, shock-proof Pelican case. Along with it, she included the 300-page printed report from Ben Carter, the forensic accountant, which detailed with surgical precision how the $210,000 had been funneled through a series of shell accounts into Marcus Thorne's possession. The next morning, a bonded courier delivered the locked Pelican case to Julian Croft's opulent office on the 45th floor of a glass tower overlooking Lake Erie. The package contained no lengthy legal arguments. Just the case, a single key, and a cover letter printed on Alana's simple, elegant letterhead. The letter read, "Mr. Croft, per our client's instructions, the enclosed evidence is provided for your review prior to formal discovery. We believe its contents will significantly clarify the nature of the marital assets and liabilities as cited in your petition. A formal response will be filed with the court in 72 hours. We trust you will advise your client accordingly. Sincerely, Alana James, Esquire." The scene inside Julian Croft's office was one of dismissive confidence turning to ice-cold panic. He saw the package as a desperate, amateurish move. He unlocked the case with a smirk, expecting a handful of blurry photos or angry emails. Instead, he found a professional, meticulously organized archive of his client's fraud. He plugged the hard drive into his top-of-the-line iMac. He saw the folders, clinically labeled CCTV Logs 2020 to 2023, Financial Forensics Report, B. Carter, Fraudulent Credit Applications, S. Park Boulevard Address, Text Message and Email Archive, C. Miller and M. Thorne. He clicked on the accountant's report first, a document bound as a PDF with official letterhead. He scrolled through flowcharts that showed money moving from loans in Wendell's name into accounts controlled by Marcus Thorne. He saw scanned copies of the credit applications, all bearing a forged electronic signature and the Shaker Heights address. Then he opened the text messages. He read his own client's words, plotting to defraud her husband. He saw the callback to the central theme of their scheme. Take it all. He can't afford to fight back. The smirk vanished from Julian Croft's face. His confident posture slumped. He wasn't just looking at evidence for a messy divorce. He was looking at a meticulously documented case for bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. His client hadn't just cheated on her husband. She had committed multiple felonies, and the opposition had it all, time-stamped and cross-referenced. Continuing with the case as planned wasn't just unwinnable. It was professionally suicidal. It bordered on suborning perjury. He picked up his phone, his hand trembling slightly. He dialed Camille. "Camille, it's Julian Croft," he said, his voice stripped of its usual warmth and bluster. "We have a problem. A significant problem. We need to talk. Now." The next day, a certified letter arrived at the upscale apartment Camille had rented. It was from the law firm of Croft, Adler, and Finch. It was a formal, legally binding withdrawal of counsel, citing a fundamental disagreement on the strategy and merits of the case, and information provided by opposing counsel that makes our continued representation ethically and legally untenable. Julian Croft had quit. The first domino had fallen. The collapse was swift and total. Camille's world, built on a foundation of lies and stolen money, disintegrated in a matter of days. The consequences cascaded, each one a direct result of the evidence Wendell had so patiently compiled. First came the legal fallout. Julian Croft's withdrawal sent a shockwave through the legal community. No other reputable family law attorney in Cleveland would touch her case. The story of the Pelican case, a legend in the making, spread quickly through the gossipy circles of lawyers and paralegals. Camille was left with no choice but to hire a desperate cut-rate attorney from a strip mall office, a man who was completely and utterly outmatched by Alana James. Second, the financial ruin. Alana filed the forensic accountant's report with the court as part of their official response. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for fraud, was appalled. In an emergency hearing, she issued a temporary order reassigning the entire $210,000 of fraudulent debt solely to Camille. Wendell's name was cleared. Simultaneously, Alana forwarded the report to the fraud departments of American Express, Capital One, and First Equity Bank. They launched their own internal investigations, which were quickly escalated to federal authorities. Third, the destruction of her accomplice. Marcus Thorne's life imploded. His prestigious wealth management firm fired him the day they received a subpoena for his financial records. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, suspended his licenses pending the outcome of the federal investigation. His clients fled. His reputation was irrevocably destroyed. Faced with financial ruin and the threat of prison time, he did what cowards do. He vanished. He cut off all contact with Camille, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The white Mercedes was repossessed a month later. Fourth, the social isolation. The sordid details of the fraud laid bare in the public court filings were devastating. The circle of friends who had listened to Camille's tales of a neglectful, financially incompetent husband now saw the truth. They saw her not as a victim, but as a predator. The invitations stopped. The sympathetic calls ceased. She was a pariah. Finally, the divorce settlement itself was a brutal confirmation of her defeat. She lost any and all claim to the house on Invermere Avenue. Her request for alimony was not just denied, but laughed out of the courtroom. The judge granted Wendell primary custody of Micah, citing Camille's gross moral and financial misconduct. She was left with nothing but her clothes, her Nissan Rogue, and a mountain of debt that would follow her for the rest of her life. She was forced to give up her expensive apartment and move into a cramped, $950 a month, one-bedroom in a part of town she used to mock. The woman who had dreamed of a Shaker Heights colonial ended up in a place with peeling paint and sirens for a lullaby. 1 year later, the quiet of a Saturday morning filled the house on Invermere Avenue. Bright sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the lingering dust motes in the air. The scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee had replaced the faint, chemical smell of lemon cleaner. The house felt lighter, happier. It felt like home again. Wendell, now 41, stood at the stove flipping pancakes. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked less tired than he had in years. The constant weight of anxiety had been lifted from his shoulders, replaced by a calm sense of purpose. Micah, now 10, sat at the kitchen table, his head bent over a piece of paper, his tongue sticking out in concentration. His hair was in neat twists, bouncing slightly as he drew. The silence between them was comfortable, easy. It was the silence of unconditional love. "Dad, look," Micah said, sliding a drawing across the table. Wendell turned off the stove and picked up the paper. On it, Micah had drawn two figures standing in front of their split-level house under a giant smiling sun. Both figures had big, round heads and stick-figure bodies. He had used a dark brown crayon for their skin, a detail that made Wendell's heart swell. Underneath the drawing, in the careful, slightly wobbly print of a 10-year-old, were the words, "My dad, my hero." Wendell's eyes welled with tears. He blinked them back, a lump forming in his throat. He had spent a year fighting to protect this quiet moment, this simple, profound piece of paper. This was the real wealth. Not the dollar amount in a bank account, but the unshakable value of a child's love and trust. Later that day, Wendell drove his reliable, fully paid-for 2018 Honda Accord, the one he'd finally been able to buy, to the dispatch office. He had to put in a few hours of weekend work to catch up, but he didn't mind. Micah came with him, setting up a small drawing station at an empty desk with his sketchbook and a box of colored pencils. Wendell sat in front of his bank of monitors, the map of the Midwest glowing with blinking lights. Each light was a truck, a driver, a life, all moving in a complex interwoven dance that he helped orchestrate. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was honest. It was real. He looked over at his son, who was happily drawing, secure and loved in the quiet hum of the office. He thought about Camille and Marcus, and their desperate, destructive pursuit of what they thought was a better life. They saw wealth in glass towers, in $95,000 cars, and in designer shoes. They never understood that true value isn't in what you can take or what you can project, but in what you can build and what you protect. It was in the quiet dignity of a job well done, the steady rhythm of a peaceful home, and the unwavering love of a son who saw him not as a simple man with a simple salary, but as a hero. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself. And in the end, it was the most profitable exchange of his life. We all face moments where we feel underestimated. Have you ever had to find a quiet strength you didn't know you had? Share your story in the comments below. We can all learn from each other's resilience. And if you found inspiration in Wendell's journey, please like this video and subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of justice, strength, and the quiet triumphs of the human heart.